Hi everyone, welcome to my channel and my space. For those of you who are new, my name is Racquel, and those of you who are returning, thank you so much for all the kind support that you have been showing me in my channel. Let's keep up with the kind comments and the kind words. If you do have an opinion and it differs from others, it's okay to state it, but do so in a constructive fashion, not a bullying, not a negative, because I will not tolerate any bullying or any negativity on my channel, because this is a channel of positivity. If you leave a negative comment, I will delete it and I will hide you from my channel. So I just want you to know that. This is a place where we can speak freely. So, as long as if you have an opinion that that I don't agree with, I will listen to your opinion, and you can keep it up there as long as it's in a constructive manner. All right? Okay, with that all being said, and I felt like I had to say that because I have been noticing some pretty nasty comments towards me and towards other commenters here on my channel, and I did have to remove a couple of people, and I don't want to have to do that. I want this to be a loving space for us all. That's why I felt the need to say this. So let's just keep the comments, constructive and uplifting or positive, okay? All right. So today's video, Dark Night of the Soul, Ego versus Soul. If you have not watched the first in this series where I go through the Dark Night in its entirety, how I see it and how I've lived through it, I do recommend you go watch that video. I will link it in the description box below, because each of these videos is going to go through a certain highlight, and I'm going to get more in depth with it. If you have any questions for me, please put them in the comments below. I'll make another video answering all those questions. Yeah, so let's get into it. What is, how does this relate to the dark night, your ego and your soul? Well, the dark night of the soul is basically the battle between your ego self and your soul self. Now, we all know that we have a soul, an inner purity, an inner light. Everybody has one, okay? Everybody is born into this life with a pure soul, okay? What happens is over time, that soul gets covered by the ego. And this is through conditioning, through parents, through friends, through society, trying to fit societal norms. So what happens is eventually this ego, it takes on all that pain, all that fear, all that feels like it's got to, it's basically the self-defense mechanism to defend the soul. So it doesn't want the soul to be shown because it's afraid the soul's going to get hurt. So it smothers it. It suffocates it. All right. And what eventually happens is there might be a trigger or something that comes along, and I will go into triggers, but that is for another video. This is just ego and soul. There's some type of trigger later on in life that makes you depressed. It's basically saying it's a trigger that wants your ego to die. It wants your ego to die because your soul wants to come out, okay? Your soul wants to be free. So it's not an actual death so much as a breakdown. Like people will say, oh yeah, dark night of the soul, that's your ego death. No. You need your ego. You do. And I will tell you later on why you need your ego. But what dark night of the soul does is it breaks down all that dark sludge, all that barrier. So then that way your soul can come out. Your soul and your ego need to live in tandem. with your higher self, okay? This is how people are successful. This is how people are happier. This is how people can attract better things in their life, when their ego and their soul are properly in line. All right? So this dark night of the soul, what it basically is the battle between the ego and the soul. All right? For me, I feel like it is just taming of the ego. Taming your ego, okay? And it's depressing, and it makes you feel like you don't want to live life anymore. It makes you feel like you're going through life robotically. It makes you feel like you have no empathy, you have no compassion. Like, it will break you down. It will break you down. And if you don't surrender to the process, if you keep trying to go against the grain, your ego keeps trying to force it to stop, then you're going to last longer in it, basically. So this is how the soul versus ego relates to the dark night. This is why I have decided to make a segment on the ego versus the soul. All right, so why do we need both? Why do we need the ego, and why do we need the soul? Why do we need them both? Why? Because life is all about balance. About balance, equality. And if you are unbalanced, if your ego is completely dead and you have no ego, you're basically immortal, because you're living in that space of where how do I put it? I don't want to be offending anybody, but it's like, oh, nothing can go wrong. I got my crystals. I got this. I got that. And you're all on like this life high. So when something goes bad, it's like you don't take it seriously. You don't take it seriously. You think, oh, it'll be okay. Everything will work out. Oh, a meteor just hit the earth. Oh, well, we'll all die. You know, it's like being happy about every single thing that happens, whether it's good or bad. It's like the soul can't distinguish, how do I put this? It's like the soul doesn't want to recognize the bad stuff. All right? I mean, it sees that the bad stuff's there, but it doesn't want to recognize it. It doesn't want to give it energy. So then things happen to the personal being. Okay? So you don't want to be in that high cloud mentality that like all the time, 24/7. You need to remain grounded, okay? So that's why you have your ego. You have your ego here to tell your soul, hey, yes, it's okay to be your authentic self, but you got to pay attention to the thing that just happened, because that thing is detrimental to your body. You know what I mean? It's like the ego is the grounding, the soul is the uplifting, the enlightening, okay? You need both. You need both in life. You can't run through life being all hippy-dippy, da-da-da-da-da, okay? You have to have a serious side, and that's what the ego is. The ego is the serious side, all right? But the ego does lie, too. The ego does lie. All right, so that's why we need both of them. We need the ego to ground us, and we need the soul to, like, you know, not take things seriously too much all the time. We need to be in a state of love, in a state of peace, right? Acceptance. It's like, all right, say somebody did you wrong, all right? Now, if you're living in your soul self, your soul, your true authentic self, and you have no ego, you forgive this person that did you wrong. But is that person going to do you wrong again? Is that person going to hurt you again? Is that person going to hurt you again and again and again? And if you're constantly living in your soul and you have no ego, you're going to constantly forgive. And what you're doing, essentially doing, is building up hurt. And then you build up your ego. And then your ego suffocates your soul. And then your soul doesn't want to come out again. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's a vicious cycle. You gotta have proper balance between the two. All right. Okay, so now that we know that you need to have proper balance between the two, let's figure out what the ego actually is. Okay, so what is the ego? What is it actually? It's your shadow self. It's brought on by pain, trauma, fear. It's what you are conditioned with over and over and over throughout life, because your parents have done it to you, your siblings have done it to you, your friends have done it to you, your society has done it to you. It's the need to fit in. So you create a false persona of yourself because you feel like your true soul self won't be accepted because you've had pain, trauma, and fear. All right? It is dense masculine energy. It is dense masculine energy. It is the protector of the soul. Remember, it protects your soul. It is how we act around people. If you're by yourself and you're by yourself for a little bit, you let out all your weird, quirky, like goofy things about you. You know, you live in your true self when you're by yourself, right? But then when you go out to the world, say you go to work, you act a certain way at work. But then when you go over to your parents, you act a certain way at your parents. But then when you go hang out with your friends, you act a certain way with your friends. That outside yourself, work, friends, family, how you act differently in each situation, that's your ego self. That is your ego self, okay? When you're by yourself, that's your soul self, okay? So ego self is how you act outward in society. It also restricts you. It puts you in this little box because it says you can't do this, you can't do that, but you can do this, so you better do this, okay? It's like when you hear a negative comment, like somebody says, oh, well, you're not a good public speaker. They put that in your head. They put that in your mind because your ego is your logic. Your ego is a logical thinker. It's a masculine energy. It thinks logically. It's strategic. It strategizes, right? So when somebody says, you're a bad public speaker, automatically it goes in your head, and then you start thinking about, why did they say that to me? And then you start analyzing how you spoke, what you said, and then you're like, oh, they're right. They're right. I'm a bad public speaker. But you know what your soul self would say? It would say, you're not a bad public speaker. That's what you need to do. You need to practice more. You know what I mean? Like your soul self will show you a wider perspective but your ego limits you. It makes you think one thing. You can only do this one thing. That's not true. Okay? So the ego restricts you to a box. Like somebody says, oh, you're not a good public speaker. So you get that in your mind. I'm not a good public speaker. Then another person says, oh, you're not good at, I don't know, what else goes with public speaking? You're not good at working in a team. So then you start thinking, I can't public speak. I can't work in a team. So then you eventually start thinking, okay, I can only do work where I'm by myself in an office desk, you know, doing work on the computer. Then you've put yourself in all these restrictions have put you in that cubicle, have put you in that box, right? And you believe that it's right because your ego tells you that it's right. Your ego tells you that what these people have said to you is right. Okay? But it's not true. It's not true. Okay? Because your soul self can see other ways, other avenues. It can see the bigger picture, whereas the ego can only see one way. The soul can see many different ways, many different opportunities, all right? But we trick ourselves into believing the ego where there's only this one way that we can go about getting something. There's only this one way we can go about getting money. There's only this one way we can go about being successful. There's this only one way that we can go to get the love that we want. That's another thing. Your ego chases things. Your ego tries to go after things. All right? Your ego will do anything to get what it wants. Okay? It will go after, it's got a one-track mind. One-track mind. It will go after anything. It will do anything to get what it wants, to go after what it wants. All right? Now, your soul, it's got many different layers. It's got many different, it can see all avenues. All right. So then, also, what your ego is very judgmental. Because what happens is, when we're living with our ego, and we're living in our ego and not in our true authentic self, when we're living in our ego, we tend to see things that are wrong with us. We do. We see things that are wrong with us, but we tend to ignore them. So when we see that wrong thing in another person, we'll judge that other person to make ourselves feel better. And that is living in the ego. When you're constantly, if you find yourself constantly judging things and people, you're coming from an ego self. Not your soul self, not your true self. You're coming from an ego self. Because your ego is saying, oh, I want that. Another thing is, ego is envious. Ego is very envious because they always want to be better. So they see people that are successful, that have what they want, and they'll start judging that person because they want to be successful like that. And they're upset that they don't have that success that the other person has. And they're not living true to their authentic self, when really, if they would stop judging somebody and they would take a look at themselves, then they would be able to obtain that success that they want. The need to be right. That's another thing. Hold on a second. My tea. The need to be right. The constant need to be right. The ego does not like to be bruised. We all hear this all the time. Oh, you bruised that person's ego, or you bruised that person's ego, right? The ego does not like to be bruised. And when the ego likes to constantly be right, they like to be right about everything. The ego self. Everybody has one. I have one. The ego likes to be right all the time. So if you're in a situation where you think you're right, you know you're right, take a step back. Take a step back for a minute. Are you really right, or are you not listening to other people's opinions? Soul self would listen to everybody else's opinion before they sit there and argue the fact that they're right. If you're caught in a battle, in an ego battle where you're going back and forth trying to prove you're right, then that's your ego talking, because your soul self knows you're right, and your soul self doesn't have to prove you're right to anybody, okay? You don't have to prove you're right when you're living in your soul self, okay? Because either people will agree with you or they won't. And the people that don't agree with you, oh well. There's other people that will agree with you, right? So you don't have to always be right, okay? But the ego loves to be right. The ego thrives on being right. Places blame. The ego places blame. The ego does not like to be wrong. So if something happens and a person is guilty of doing something, they'll place the blame on somebody else because they don't want to own up to the fact that they did something wrong. Now, the soul self will take responsibility for that. The soul self will be like, yeah, oops, I fucked up. How can I make it better? The ego will be like, no, that wasn't me. That was Timmy down the road. Timmy down the road did it. Or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, when you find yourself starting to place the blame for actions that you know that you had a hand in, that is your ego self. That is your ego self speaking. All right? Sticking to the past. Your ego cannot let things go. Remember, it's a dense energy. Okay, your ego is a dense energy. And the reason why it's a dense energy is because it remembers all that pain. It remembers all that trauma. It remembers all that fear from the past. It remembers. Remember, it's conditioned. It's conditioned through fear, pain, and trauma. All right? And the need for acceptance. So it holds on to every little thing. It remembers every little thing from the past. And it's like this. Even if you don't consciously think you remember something from the past, it still holds on to it. It holds on to it. All right? And this is what it uses as its protective barrier for the soul. All right? It's constantly living in the past, constantly thinking of the past. I should have done this. I could have done that. Why did that happen? That person is horrible. This person is horrible. Even though, like, now in the future, those people could have went through their own things and did their own redemption. All right? They still hold grudges on people from the past. They are grudge holders. The ego is a grudge holder. All right? And with that dense energy, you can't be free. You can't be free with stones tied to your feet, okay? With the past tied to your feet. You can't you can't enjoy the present because you've got, for one, you've got these heavy things around your feet, right? Which is unhappiness. And for two, you can't fly anywhere towards the future because you've got these dense rocks freaking holding you down, right? That's the ego. That's the ego. It's holding on to all that trauma, holding on to all that pain. Yeah, you went through it. Yes, you went through it. You need to acknowledge it. Yes, I went through that stuff, but it made you stronger. It made you strong enough to let it go. Believe it or not. All right? It always rushes. The ego always rushes. I got to get this done. I got to get that done. If I don't do this right now, time is of the essence. You might hear those thoughts pop up in your head. Time is of the essence. We got to do this now. I got to get here. I got to get there. And then what happens? You become irritable when things get in your way. You start coming off like a raging bitch to other people because you get irritated because you can't get where you need to be. You feel like there is a time limit always. You're always looking at the clock. Oh, I got to be at this appointment at this time. Oh, I got to be here at that time. Yeah, it's important to maintain, to show up and be present on time. I'm not, that's where the ego can help you out, right? That's where that balance is coming about that I'm talking about. If you were all carefree and had no ego to redirect you sometimes, then you would be late for everything. You would be late for everything and people wouldn't think you were reliable, right? So that's why you got to have the balance there. But when you're constantly rushing and you're constantly on the go, you're rushing through life, you're not enjoying what's around you. You're not enjoying your journey. All right? So like I said, there's got to be equal balance there. The ego is limitation. Like I said, it keeps you in a box. It keeps you confined. It doesn't want you to explore the world because it wants to keep you safe. It's like that overprotective parent. Okay? The ego is that overprotective parent. And it wants to keep you confined to a box. It wants to keep you safe. It wants to keep you in your place. All right? Your ego will fight the system. All right? So if you feel like you believe in something and you're not listening to other people's views, you are in turn fighting against the system. You're not going with the change, you are resisting the change, right? Because the ego does not like change. The ego likes to be safe. The ego likes to be secure. The ego likes to protect, right? And it doesn't like chaos. It doesn't like going with the flow. It doesn't like that stuff, right? Because its main goal is to keep your soul safe, right? Sometimes we give too much power to the ego and the ego takes over. And then that's what happens when the dark night of the soul is triggered. It breaks that down because the ego has overstepped its boundary. The ego, if you're going through the dark night of the soul, you have let your ego overstep your boundaries. All right? So what is the soul? What is the soul? The soul is light feminine energy, okay? It's nurturing energy. It's giving, it's loving, it's caring. If you think of the moon and you think of Cancer, divine feminine, it's the light in the dark energy, all right? It's who you truly are. It's your lighter self brought on by acceptance and love. It's your forgiveness. Okay? It's your goodness. You're willing to see the good in people. You're willing to see the good in situations. You're willing to see the positive side of things. All right? It's who you truly are. Your soul knows. When you come into this world, you are pure light. All right? You're a being that has had many lifetimes. You already know your answers. You already know where you're going in life when you're born, when you come into this lifetime. What happens is, like I said, we get conditioned. And then what happens is we get conditioned too much, or we go through too much trauma, we go through too much pain, and our ego oversteps its bounds and suffocates our soul. That's what happens. So, it is you always being yourself, and no matter in what situation you're in, no matter if you're at work, if you're with your parents, if you're with your siblings, if you're with your friends, you are always staying true to your authentic self. Okay? That is your soul self. When you stay true to your authentic self, then your universe around you switches. You'll notice it'll switch up, but it'll switch up for the better. It'll switch up for the positive. The soul is never judgmental because the soul realizes that we're all connected, that we're all equal. It doesn't care about your skin color. It doesn't care about your hair color. It doesn't care about how much weight you have. It doesn't care about how skinny you are. It doesn't. Whether you have like 6 fingers and 7 toes, it doesn't care. It doesn't care. All it cares about is the love of man, the love for your fellow man. All right? It's pure love and acceptance. Before any hate, before any, when you come into this earth, okay, so say we take a person. You come into this earth, say that this person's name is Joe or something. Okay, so we're going to just use Joe as an example. Joe comes into this world, is born, all right, this pure infinite soul. But he's born to a family that is very prejudiced against a certain skin color. All right. Now, Joe goes to school or goes out and plays, and there's a person of color comes up, okay? And they're having a good time. They're having fun. They're playing. They're having, they don't care. Joe doesn't care about skin color right now because he hasn't been conditioned yet. All right. Then the father comes out and goes, why are you playing with da-da-da-da? And throws out slanderous words, right? Takes Joe in. And Joe doesn't understand because he was just the person that he was having fun with was really cool and really fun and, a good person. Because Joe saw that in that other person. But then the father just keeps browbeating him and browbeating him and browbeating him over the years. You got to hate this thing. You got to hate this race. You got to hate this race. You got to hate this race. So Joe's true self doesn't hate that race. But that ego self that's wrapped around his soul hates that race because he was conditioned to. And I'm just using that as an example. I am not a racist, so please don't put that on my channel. I've got cousins that are all different backgrounds. So, yeah, let's get off the subject of race. But that was just an example. If you understand what I'm saying, it's the conditioned. Okay, it's the conditioned. It always takes responsibility. It always takes responsibility, no matter what it does. Okay, I just saw a school bus go by. Don't tell me my kids have a half day. When that happens. Not that I don't love my kids, it's just that I want to get my work done. All right, so yeah, it takes responsibility. Like me taking responsibility right now. I should have looked at the school schedule. You know what I mean? Like, it's owning up to those little mistakes that you make or big mistakes that you make. Like, say you're driving down the street and you accidentally hit a squirrel. Do you keep going? Most people keep going. But then you feel guilty afterward, right? Because you kept going. Because you didn't come back and, say something to it or something like that. Or say you hit a dog or something and kept going. You know what I mean? Then you start feeling guilty. And the reason why you start feeling guilty is because your ego self didn't want to take responsibility for that. It covered up that. So your soul self feels guilty that it wasn't able to take responsibility for it, right? So then you start getting this feeling of remorse or this feeling of guilt inside yourself because your true self wasn't allowed to take responsibility for it. All right? You weren't allowed to own up to your responsibility because your ego self was like, no, 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 we need to go, get away. Let's save ourselves. So your soul gets upset and feels guilty because it wasn't allowed to take responsibility for what it was supposed to take responsibility for. Your soul lives for the now. Like how I said, your ego lives for the past. It's stuck in the past. It brings all that past trauma. Your soul doesn't live for that. Your soul wants to live in the moment. Your soul wants to enjoy your life. You are here to learn. Your soul is here to learn, to evolve, to move up in the ladder, right, of evolution, of soul evolution, okay? But it's also here to have a good time. It's also here to enjoy the experience because over there it's not physical. It's not physical. Your true, authentic self wants to live in the moment, wants to experience food, sex, fun, whatever it is. It wants to enjoy it. So you want to live in the present, right? That's what your soul self wants to do. And it wants to learn. It wants to learn from the present. All right? It doesn't care about what happened in the past because what happened in the past happened in the past. And it does not define who you are now. The only thing it did was change you, was make your ego more stronger if you hold on to it. Your soul self is calm, is patient, is kind. Okay? When challenges and chaos arrive, your soul self quiets and it observes what's going on around you. Your ego, now your ego, if you have a highly active ego, in times of chaos, it'll rush in and it'll try to sort it out, and it'll just, like, sometimes it'll fuck it up even worse. You know what I mean? So, you know, that's where the balance between the ego and the soul needs to take place, because sometimes you just need to get beyond the problem. You need to extract yourself from the problem and calm yourself down and listen to what your soul self would say. What would your soul self do in this situation? Because your ego is just all about fighting, about, like, protecting, about, you know, defense and grudges and stuff like that. And your soul self is all calm, peaceful. How do we sort out this problem? All right? That's why I always encourage meditation, because that is like putting yourself away from everybody else, taking some time out to yourself and asking yourself truly, how do I solve this problem? Or what do I truly want? All right? You need your ego. I am not against your ego. You do need your ego. There are situations where you do need your ego, and I have my ego for that. I do. But you also need to pay attention to your soul self as well. Otherwise, your ego takes over. Your soul self is limitless. Limitless. Like I said, it sees the bigger, broader perspective here. It sees all avenues. It can see beyond the situations. All right? It knows what to do because it knows all these different ways you can solve a problem. Your ego thinks there's only one way to solve a problem. But your soul self knows millions of ways to solve a problem. Your soul self is limitless. And it goes with the flow of life because it knows that as long as it's being true and authentic to itself, the right things will come in. The universe will open up doors, all right? Because it is being open-minded. It is being open to change. It is being open to exploration, because that's what your soul is ultimately here for, is exploring, expanding your mind, expanding your soul, going to a higher soul level, so that when you go over there, you're in a higher rank, all right? The success you get on earth has nothing to do compared with the success that you have over there. And the reason why we're on earth is to learn lessons so we can have more success over there, all right? All right, so why do we use both? Or how do we use both? By knowing the difference between your soul self and your ego self. Your ego self will say, will give you negative thoughts, negative pep talk, all right? It'll say, you're not good enough for this, you need to try something different. It'll say, oh, you need to do this, this is where you're best at. You know, I wouldn't say negative thoughts, but it's like you're limiting thoughts, all right? You're limiting thoughts. It's all mental. It's all mental, okay? When you get those thoughts, it's all mental. Your soul self, that's your intuition. That's your intuition right there. Like getting a thought and then just knowing that's where you need to go, all right? When you have thoughts but you don't have that strong intuition pull, that's your ego. By noticing our ego, wait a minute, how do we use both? By noticing. Okay, so when our ego comes out, by noticing when our ego comes out. Like when you get in ego battles with somebody, like, I'm right. And that other person's like, no, I'm right. And you battle back and forth. Or you ever seen those text messages, or you ever get into a text message battle with somebody, or a messenger battle with somebody, and then you're just sitting there battling back and forth through text message? That's your ego. if you catch yourself having to explain yourself, that's your ego. All right? If you have to explain yourself or explain your decisions more than once, that's your ego. Your soul self should only have to explain it once. And if people don't get it, oh well. All right? So if you're in a battle back and forth with somebody over, oh, I'm right, no, I'm right, no, I'm right, that's your ego self. Why does it come out? Why does it come out? It comes out because sometimes our ego comes out to let us know that there's something about us that we need to check. All right? It does. It'll come out and it'll say, okay, there's some hurt, there's some pain here, you need to check. So try to figure out, like, once you can realize what your ego is and when you're living in it too much, when it's projected out too much, there's a reason why you're projecting out your ego. What triggered it? What triggered you to have to be so defensive of yourself? Then go back and, like, confront that pain. Okay, well, all right, so here's a perfect example. Let's see. When I was younger, I used to get teased because of buck teeth. So, you know, as time, like, people would tease and bully me over my buck teeth and stuff like that, right? So that put it in my mind that I wasn't pretty for a very long time of my life. You know what I mean? Before I let my ego die and my soul came out. So, but anyways, it put it in my mind that I wasn't pretty. So when I was going through my ego death, there were a lot of things, or my ego breakdown, there were a lot of things that came up that triggered me, that made me feel like I wasn't pretty. And I had to go, well, why do I feel like I'm not pretty? And then I realized, oh, it was because, I'm hanging on to all the things that I went through when I went through school. All the bullying that I had when I was in school, I was letting that, you know, that carry me through life. And I was making bad decisions to prove that I was pretty. You know what I mean? I wasn't making the right decisions to prove that I was pretty. So it made me realize, oh, I need to take a look at why I'm still carrying on this baggage. And I let the baggage go. And ever since then, I have more self-confidence. I feel beautiful about myself. And I don't care if anybody tells me I'm not pretty. You know why? Because I know I'm pretty. I know I am. You know what I mean? I don't have to have anybody tell me that. I don't have to have anybody reiterate that. But what I'm saying is that you've got to recognize when your ego comes into play, because then that will help you ultimately, in the long run, become more authentic to yourself. Because whatever hurts you, whatever triggers you, you have to go back to the source of the problem. Because and trust me, you will know, because your ego holds on to everything. So you have to go back to the source of the problem, see why the problem's there, see who you truly are now, and then say, you know what? I forgive the past. I let you go. Bye. Bye that aspect of my ego. I'm not going to no longer let you run me. All right? That's why we need both, because we need the ego. We need the ego to bring these things up. It humbles us. It humbles us. It really does, because it shows us the parts of ourselves that need fixing. All right? That's why we need the ego. It's humbling yourself and your situation. You have to let your soul have a say. You have to let your soul have a say, okay? Like I said, it's good to have your ego because it grounds you, it humbles you, right? But you have to let your soul have a say, all right? That's how you keep them balanced. That's how you have them work with each other, all right? Well, I feel like I talked in circles here. I hope you guys got something out of that. If you didn't, or if you're confused, please leave me a comment below. I feel like that was all over the place. But just know that, you know, your ego self is like your masculine side. It is, you know, your defensive side. It is not always right. It's restrictive. It's limiting. But it's there for a reason. It's to keep you grounded. It's to keep you humble, all right? Your soul self is there, and that's who you should strive to be like, to let free, because once you do, then things in your life fall into place for you when you start living your true, authentic self, all right? Well, until the next video, I hope you all take care. Thank you so much for watching this Spirit Speak. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, please give this video a like and subscribe. Always happy to have more people on my channel here. Well, until the next Spirit Speak, you all take care.